Hello everyone, REM here, and welcome back to another episode of Draw and Discuss. I have a few videos coming up where I talk about the head ornamentations of various dinosaur species, whether they were carnivores or herbivores. And before we get to those, I wanted to focus on some interesting ornamentations of modern-day animals. And, just like last month's episode, comparing venom with poison, I want to specifically compare two structures that are often mixed up, but are totally different: antlers and horns. Let's start with antlers. I'm basing my deer here off of a white-tailed deer, but based on those big ears and more wide-set pair of antlers, I do wonder if this looks a little bit more like a mule deer. But it is a deer nonetheless, and deer have antlers. Big plot twist there. Across most deer species, male deer, or bucks, or bulls, tend to grow antlers, whereas the females do not. There are some exceptions. Some deer species grow large fangs rather than antlers, which is something that I will have talked about in a Wild and Weird episode, and some deer species, mostly the caribou or reindeer, actually have both sexes, male and female, grow antlers at different times of the year. And, fun fact, this means that the team of reindeer pulling Santa's sleigh are actually all females, because the female caribou are the ones that have antlers in the winter. But for most deer species, it's only the males that will grow their antlers, and this is an annual event. The males will grow a new set of antlers before the breeding season begins, use those antlers to try and control a harem of females during the rut or breeding season, and then once those antlers are no longer needed, they will be shed and drop off the animal. Antlers are comprised fully of bone, which means that every year, bucks need to grow an entirely new part of their skeleton from scratch. This takes a ton of energy and resources away from the body, which is why it's used as a measure of a male's fitness. If he has larger antlers, it means that he probably has more access to better nutrients for his body to grow those large antlers. Antler growth is triggered by sunlight levels and testosterone levels, and it's actually one of the fastest cellular growth mechanisms in the entire animal kingdom. Depending on the species of deer, an antler can grow 1/4 of an inch to an inch every single day. In moose bulls, their antlers can grow over a pound every single day. This is aided by a soft tissue cover called velvet, which provides blood flow and nutrients to the antlers as they grow. Once the antlers are done growing, the velvet will dry up, and the buck will rub his antlers on trees and other structures to rub it off, which leaves him looking a little scary and bloody for a few days, but it is a totally natural and painless process of growing antlers. Once the breeding season is over, as the animal begins preparing for winter and heading into winter, these antlers will fall off and be shed. You can collect them, and if cleaned properly, they could be a cool decoration or a good chew toy for a dog, since it's essentially the same thing as giving them a cow bone. But if left in the wild, antlers will typically be chewed on by a variety of animals, especially rodents like squirrels and mice, because it's a great source of calcium. A buck or bull will continue growing antlers annually for his entire lifetime, peaking somewhere around 6 to 8 years old, with younger and older, weaker animals having smaller racks. If an animal has a genetic mutation, is malnourished, or had an injury to the bud spot where antlers will grow from, the antlers may grow in unusual, asymmetrical, or atypical patterns. In terms of deer hunting, atypical rack patterns are typically scored differently and a little bit lower than the typical tine pattern, just because it's seen as unusual, but I honestly think that atypical tines should earn more points, because they can be really, really cool. Away from deer, let's transition into talking about horns. which are had by a variety of animals, such as goats, sheep, cows, and even rhinoceros. Horns do have a bone component, however, it's only in the core of the horn and it's permanent. It is part of the animal's skull and the horn is not shed at all during the animal's lifetime. The rest of the horn is a keratin sheath, made up of the same stuff that your fingernails are made of. So, in a similar fashion, horns will continue to grow throughout the animal's lifetime. This can actually become rather problematic for the animal. If an injury altered the growth pattern of the horn, or if they had a genetic mutation altering horn growth, the horn may loop back towards the animal's face. And if there's no intervention of any sort, the horn may rub up against the animal's skin, eventually puncturing the skin, and potentially even killing the animal very slowly and painfully. If the keratin sheath of a horn is damaged in some way, but the bone core is still fine, then the horn will just continue to grow as normal. It would essentially be the same thing as cutting your fingernails. And this is actually what farmers do if they have a sheep, goat, or cow end up in the dangerous situation I mentioned. They can just saw off the tip of the horn and the animal will be safe. If the bone core of a horn is damaged, it may alter horn growth or stop horn growth altogether. Although, to be fair, if there's severe damage that close to the animal's head, it's pretty likely that the animal is suffering in other ways, if not already dead. Besides, the skulls and bone cores of the horns of these animals tend to be very well reinforced, considering most of these horns are used for headbutting rivals, especially with males. Think of bighorn sheep and the way that they ram into each other, creating a sound almost like a gunshot. If those horns or their skull was weak in any way, they would not survive it. There are a few other structures you might see on mammals. For example, giraffes and okapis have ossicones, which are bony growths out of the skull, similar to a horn core, but they lack the keratin sheath on the outside that would make it a true horn. Similarly, you might notice tusks, like those on wild boars, elephants, or even narwhals, and those are actually just elongated and specialized teeth. So, if you didn't know, a narwhal's unicorn horn is just a really, really long tooth. In birds and reptiles, you may see things called casques, which are bony outgrowths out of the skull around the forehead area. In birds, this usually overlaps with the base of the beak, and for the most part, this is used as sexual selection signaling. Outside of bone structures, a variety of animals across all species may have soft tissue structures that will enhance their features. You might have jowls, or on birds, you might see wattles, which is one thing to take into consideration when reconstructing how dinosaurs may have looked. A lot of times it's easy to forget that they would have fat and soft tissue structures that may have just been for purely decorative use. So, before we travel back in the past to explore the head ornamentations of dinosaurs, just keep in mind that head ornamentations of modern-day animals are equally as stunning. We just see them so often we forget how interesting and complex they can be. But also keep in mind that it's possible that a T-Rex would have had a wattle just like a chicken. And that should remind you to smile.